Right, so hi everyone again. I'm Beth Brockett from Forest Research, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Natural Environment Social Research Network. So we're a network of social researchers who work on the environment from government agencies and departments across England, Scotland and Wales. And this came from... how do I start the presentation?
Good.
Oh, right, there we go. Great. This is about working effectively with policy and practice colleagues and sharing our experiences and learning. And it came out of a desire to demystify some conversations within the Access Network and wider, to demystify what we do in policy and practice spaces as social scientists. And so these slides have been developed by the sort of core group of the network, which is the Environment Agency, Natural England, Forest Research, Natural Resources Wales and NatureScot. And I have to say that they are our experiences of these spaces, so we're not pretending they're comprehensive, and it'd be great if others that work in these spaces could sort of help us to make them even more useful, or hopefully they're useful. So there'll be opportunities to discuss whether these resonate for you, how useful they are, what we might do with them, but also your own experiences of working with the likes of us in policy and practice spaces. So, this is sort of our take on working, and we're obviously all nature agencies in the core group, or agencies, environment agencies, but we have had some experience obviously working with our sort of government colleagues, and I just want to say up front, this is a diverse set of roles, and we haven't run it past, obviously, the entire spread of government social researchers. And there's also no difference as to whether the text is in a box or not, because it's just, I couldn't work PowerPoint, basically, but it looked nice. So the amount of time social scientists spend on these roles varies, and it also varies by social science role and by person. And I've highlighted here in yellow and orange the areas I'll speak a bit more about. So here, this is about direct involvement in policy development, and this tends to be government department analysts and social scientists, and maybe policy makers with social science backgrounds. And so here I've focused on social scientists' role in policy evaluations. This is an area a lot of social science time goes into, and a lot of progress, I feel, has been made in this area over recent years, and not just in government departments, but at places like Natural England. And there's a Her Majesty's Treasury guidance on evaluation is the Magenta book, which is one good place to start looking if you're interested. I've also highlighted that we undertake quite a lot of collation of existing evidence and interpreting and translating it within a specific policy context to answer sometimes very, very specific questions, as we discussed in our breakout groups yesterday around rapid responses. We undertake a commission quite a lot of public attitude surveys, and I've highlighted in orange that helping to frame issues, it's a lot less common in our experience, but I think it's something that social scientists in these spaces would like to do more of. And then we've broken it down to applied research focused on policy needs. So this often tends to be social scientists and government agencies. So I'll just note here, obviously government agencies vary quite a lot in terms of their roles and responsibilities, but the reason we hang out as a network of agency social scientists because we do have a lot in common. So I've highlighted case studies and insights because we do quite a lot of this. We also do a lot of helping colleagues think through the social dimensions of a work area, so structuring thinking in a social science way, sort of systematically and analytically. For example, how sustainable indicators could be incorporated into their work, which Clive is going to touch on in a minute. We do a lot of reviewing and translation, sometimes building on what's already there, with a bit of extra research or analysis to make it fit the question or the context, or to make it easier to understand and apply. We had a discussion about kitchen implements and which one we'd be last night on our table, and we like to think of ourselves as bridges, but my preferred one is a funnel. Bridge isn't a kitchen implement, but a funnel. Because basically, I sort of see my role as sort of trying to work out what's all out there in academia and elsewhere that I can help bring to shed light on some of the questions that our organisations have. Charlotte wanted to be a colander, she can explain that later. And we also, working with colleagues to understand policy needs is in orange, because frequently find that questions and issues are still predominantly, or certainly I do, framed as natural science issues, so that's why that's in orange there. Informing and supporting delivery through policy tools. So again, often social scientists and government agencies, also social scientists in NGOs, where they're assessing policy progress or they're delivering through policy tools. And here I mean sort of supporting operational and delivery colleagues. For example, area teams delivering agri-environment schemes, or colleagues working in permitting, or managing our holdings like national nature reserves and flood management facilities. Tends to be agencies, although government departments do have some of this delivery responsibility, and ENGOs might be helping to deliver through activities such as advice functions, or directly managing some of like Natural England's national nature reserves. So here I've highlighted stakeholder analysis at the bottom. We do a lot of this, including increasingly identifying different, i.e. non-traditional, marginalised viewpoints. And also this box illustrates how messy evidence production can be, and the spaces that we work in, with market research, engagement leads and others all getting involved in that work and how it should be used. I've also highlighted the so what box, because we can spend quite a lot of time persuading or marketing social science in our organisation sometimes. For example, if a strategy is being refreshed, we might be asked or request involvement in outlining how social scientists can help inform the strategy or the operational approach. And this links into the next set, which is increasing awareness of or improved use and competency of social research. And I say a lot of us in all different departments and agencies and NGOs get involved with this. It's ensuring our function is optimised within our organisations, which Carol and I touched on a little bit yesterday. And we ask ourselves whether our colleagues need to understand social science, or do we just give them the answers? And the answer depends on what we have time and steer to get involved with. For example, training, but also the nature of colleagues' roles and whether they benefit more generally from learning more about social science. It's also about them knowing enough about social science to come to us, to ask useful questions of us, and to get out of the most of what we provide. I've highlighted collaborating, including interdisciplinary collaboration, as we do a lot of collaboration, but interestingly not always interdisciplinary, or in my experience truly interdisciplinary, with other specialist and analyst colleagues. And it's something I've flagged in work package 1 of Access, and I think it would take a whole session to unpick that, but I think it varies quite a lot between organisations. And my new job in forestry research, I'm doing a lot more interdisciplinary work. And then finally, these are sort of potential additional roles that we'd like. This leads into what Karen talks about, what Karen and I were talking about yesterday, around additional roles that we tend not to have, but we would like to have, or these are roles that wouldn't necessarily fit into the previous slide. So social policy advice, such as how to tackle inequalities in a particular policy area, is something I've put that Pete can speak more about in his breakout group. Sorry, I don't remember putting that in, but it used to be your job title, apparently, that's why. The social policy bit, yes, thanks. Sorry. But I think sometimes that can be confused with providing a social science function. So that social policy advice, social science function can be a bit confused. And also how we get into some of those more disruptive, reflexive and innovative roles, for example. I think it depends on our own agency within that role, how comfortable we feel in pushing the social science agenda, capacity for thinking differently, our relationships and our allies, who gets social science, how good are we at negotiating and in influencing. And just in the last 2 minutes before we move into breakout rooms, Clive's going to provide an example to illustrate some of our aspirations, how social science can be used to support transformative thinking within policy and practice, specifically ways sustainable development can be framed and opened up and gives different weighting to different disciplines.
Thanks, Beth. Okay. So, I'm just going to paint a landscape of sustainable development. So starting with the Brundtland definition, it's quite straightforward, except that wants and needs are socially situated, and who speaks for future generations and with what authority, and are we talking about growth in quantitative GDP terms or qualitative developmental kind of terms, And we're obviously talking about both physical and social sciences in socio-ecological systems, and environmental limits are local and regional and global, and they all interact in highly complex ways. And then the five capitals approaches this through these five lenses, and even if they can be measured, the critical question then is how interchangeable they are, and whether we have full substitution or no substitution between them, with, for example, the wedding cake portrayal of the UN Sustainable Development Goals with the environment as the basis for society in which the economy sits. And then that gives rise to notions of weak and strong sustainability. And I've left a gap over on the left for more ecocentric framings of our relationship with the rest of the planet. And so we have then problem-solving approaches using existing institutional and governance frameworks to solve the sorts of problems that we're talking about. But on the critical theory side and power relations, thinking about that those institutions and governance are actually part of the problem as well. And then a sort of whole spectrum of economics sits with all of that. And governments and people tend to be more comfortable with supply-side interventions because this is all helping to promote growth. But demand-side consumption degrowth is much more difficult to deal with. Behaviour change ranging from kind of nudge to behavioural transformation. Efficiencies in unbounded economies tend to lead to rebound effects because you're just making unit of production cheaper, and so the only sensible thing to do in an unbounded economy is to use more of it, whereas circular economies are more concerned with absolute resource use, and hence Daskupta's sort of emphasis on embedding the economies in nature. There's a whole bunch of decision-making tools which default to the status quo as the desired option, but of course the status quo is deeply problematic. And then we have all sorts of ways of measuring aggregate costs and benefits, but of course all the issues lie within the distribution of those. And then for fun we can start plotting the various interests of different institutions on this spectrum of landscape. But then thinking about this as a kind of a landscape with it sort of generally being easier territory on the left and more difficult territory on the right, we can start to think about some of the challenges we have. So this is a sort of existing land use with different areas allocated to different purposes, mainly on the sort of productivist ideology from the 1950s and 60s onwards, giving rise to net greenhouse gas emissions, degraded soils, degraded nature, and increasing vulnerability to climate risks. And we need to try, and this is where we need to go, then invariably we're going to be into some of that more difficult territory. And social sciences are our map and compass through all of that, and if we don't use them, we'll get well and truly lost. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Clive.